The scale of ancient Egypt was not born from vanity, but from the immense geometry of its landscape. To compete with the horizon, their monuments had to mimic the mountains themselves. Every year, the Nile River swelled, erasing boundaries and depositing thick, dark, fertile mud. This natural cycle created an agricultural surplus, feeding a massive, organized society. For 3 months during the flood, millions of farmers could not till the soil. This idle workforce was not enslaved, but mobilized under a sacred state duty. Deep within the earth, Egypt possessed an inexhaustible wealth of monumental stone. From the soft limestone of Tura to the brutal, iron-hard pink granite of Aswan, the pharaohs possessed the 2 raw ingredients of eternity: unlimited muscle and indestructible rock. In the northern quarries, the extraction of a single titan required mechanical genius. Laborers pounded the stone relentlessly, using 10-pound balls of solid green diorite. Slowly, millimeter by millimeter, they pulverized the granite to isolate a single block. Next, dry wooden wedges were driven into natural fissures and soaked with water. As the wood expanded, the immense hydraulic pressure split the ancient mountain open. Freeing a 100-ton block was only the beginning of a logistical epic. Giant sledges cut from imported Lebanese cedar were built to sustain the weight. To avoid sinking into the desert, workers poured water to slick the clay path ahead. The wet sand reduced friction by half, allowing the titan to glide across the waste. Day after day, the convoy crawled toward the banks of the waiting Nile. Here, the power of human muscle would meet the current of the sacred river. In the Egyptian cosmos, the pharaoh was not a mere mortal chosen by the divine. He was the living incarnation of Horus, the sky god, walking among men. His primary cosmic duty was to uphold Mat, the eternal balance against chaos. If the king's presence weakened, the sky would fall and the river would dry. To make his presence absolute, his physical image had to become permanent. A small statue could be buried by time. A colossus became part of the landscape. When a peasant stood before the temple pylon, the message was immediate. The scale was psychological warfare, crushing individual ego before the state. The colossus did not represent the king's human body, but his divine institution. Therefore, the face never showed age, weakness, or human emotion. It was a portrait of a god-king looking past the viewer into eternity. Over time, pharaohs merged their identity with the primeval forces of creation. By carving their likeness onto the temples of Ammon, they became co-creators. These stone giants served as legal deeds, claiming ownership over the land. To the Egyptian mind, the statue was not a passive symbol, but a living vessel. Through the sacred ritual of the opening of the mouth, the statue was animated. The king's ka, his vital life force, could occupy the stone at will. If his organic body perished in the tomb, this stone duplicate stood unyielding. It was an insurance policy against non-existence, written in granite. No mortal could erase a king whose body was 100 tons of solid rock. They designed them to look down upon the rise and fall of entire empires. And so, the landscape became an army of immortal pharaohs, frozen in time. To erect these stone giants, Egyptian architects solved immense mechanical puzzles. They did not possess iron tools, cranes, or pulleys. They relied on pure geometry. Transporting a colossus from Aswan to Thebes required mastery over water. During the inundation, engineers dug specialized canals straight to the temple gates. The barge would float directly into a custom basin, right above its foundation. As the floodwaters receded, the titan was lowered perfectly onto its stone pedestal. For inland sites, they built colossal ramps made of sun-dried mud, bricks and sand. These ramps grew with the statue, encasing the monument in an artificial hill. To haul a 50-ton torso up a 10-degree slope required sheer physical synchronicity. The logistics of maintaining this workforce was an industrial triumph. Daily rations required tens of thousands of standardized loaves and fresh beer. Bones found in worker cemeteries prove they received high-protein meat and medical care. They were a proud national workforce, driven by a deep spiritual consensus. Once the rough stone block was positioned, the master sculptors climbed the ramps. They carved from the top down, finishing the crown while the feet were still buried. To maintain absolute proportions, they painted a red grid directly onto the rock. Each body part had a strict ratio, 18 grids, from the feet to the eyes. This mathematical canon ensured that a statue looked perfect from any angle below. To polish the hard stone, artisans spent weeks rubbing it with quartz sand and emery. Finally, the earthen ramps were slowly dismantled, layer by layer, revealing the god. The engineering was flawless. The center of gravity was calculated to the millimeter. They did not just build monuments, they mastered the physics of gravity itself. As the centuries rolled on, the size of Egyptian statues underwent a radical inflation. This escalation was not driven by peace, but by political insecurity and crisis. When a dynasty's legitimacy was questioned, the monuments grew larger. It was an ancient form of shock and awe, giant stone to mask human vulnerability. Pharaoh Ramesses II turned this monumental propaganda into an obsession. Ruling for 66 years, he determined to stamp his image onto every acre of Egypt. If a temple did not have his statue, he ordered his engineers to build but the quarries could not keep pace with his boundless megalomania. So, Ramesses began a systematic campaign of architectural appropriation. He ordered scribes to chisel away the names of past pharaohs from older colossi. In their place, his stonemasons carved his own cartouche deeper into the granite. By stealing the monuments of his ancestors, he rewrote history in stone. These statues were the state-controlled mass media of the Bronze Age. They shouted a clear message to the illiterate masses: the king is eternal and unassailable. In the south, he carved Abu Simbel directly into the mountains of Nubia. It was a calculated territorial threat to the southern kingdoms. Turn back, or face a god. The immense resource drain pushed the economy to its breaking point. Timber for sledges grew scarce, and specialized copper tools wore down to nothing. Yet, the race could not stop. A pharaoh without a colossus was a king without power. Every generation demanded a louder scream against the silence of time. They transformed natural geological structures into political billboards. The land was no longer just earth. It was the physical manifest of royal ego. Among the hundreds of stone giants, some achieved an almost supernatural reputation. These are the colossi of Memnon, two 60-foot quartz, sandstone sentinels. In the year 27 BC, a massive earthquake shattered the northern colossus. Following this structural trauma, a bizarre phenomenon began at every dawn. As the sun's rays warmed the fractured stone, the monument began to sing. It produced a metallic, whistling tone, like the snapping of a lyre string. Travelers from across the Roman Empire crossed oceans to witness the miracle. Emperors, poets, and historians carved their names into its base to prove they heard it. They believed it was Memnon, son of the dawn, crying out to his mother, Eos. Modern physics reveals the truth. It was a masterpiece of accidental acoustics. The morning heat caused moisture inside the porous stone to evaporate rapidly. As the pressurized air rushed through the microfissures, it created the singing effect. When Romans repaired the statue in 200 AD, the voice was silenced forever. This interplay between stone, sun, and science was intentional in Egyptian design. At Abu Simbel, a grand solar alignment occurs only twice a year. The light travels 200 feet into the dark mountain sanctuary. It strikes the faces of Amun, Rahorikti, and the deified Ramesses himself. But the light carefully misses Ptah, the ancient god of the underworld. This was not coincidence. It was astrophysics calculated to the second. The giant statues were cosmic clocks, locking the kingdom into the gears of heaven. Every dawn, the sun physically validated the pharaoh's right to rule. The physical mass of the rock was a bridge to the metaphysical order. The golden age of the pharaohs eventually collapsed under the weight of history. The dynasties vanished, and the names of the great builders became myth. The Nile shifted its path, and the grand capitals were swallowed by sand. Yet, the colossi refused to die. They stood immovable against the desert wind. For centuries, they slept, buried up to their necks in the golden wastes. When early modern explorers arrived, the sheer scale defied their comprehension. they realized the pharaohs had won their war against absolute oblivion. Today, millions of people cross the globe to stand in their immense shadows. We experience the exact same visceral awe felt by humans 3 millennia ago. These monuments stand as physical proof of what human willpower can achieve. They did not build small because they did not think small. Their gods were cosmic, and their architectural ambitions were infinite. Every chisel stroke was a strike against the temporary nature of human life. The kings have long turned to dust, but their stone avatars still rule. They remain as permanent monuments to engineering, faith, and memory. When you look upon a colossus, you are looking at eternity made physical. You are witnessing the sweat of 100,000 men frozen in granite. They did not just carve rock, they carved their soul into the earth. The giants of Egypt endure, waiting to tell their story to the next generation. Thank you for joining us on this deep journey into the ancient past.